There are two patients that I can remember that helped me see how beautiful death can be. People often hear that I'm a hospice nurse, and the first thing I get back is either, ugh, that must be depressing, or, oh, you're an angel to be able to do that. And I need to set the record straight. It is, one, I'm not an angel, and two, it is not depressing. I have countless stories, countless connections I've made with people that have truly changed my life and changed my view of death and dying. I want to give you these two stories in particular because they stand out to me, but please know that I have, I would say, hundreds of encounters that have made me feel this way as well. My patients teach me so much, and these two patients in particular really help me see what I call love in action, meaning I see families and patients and how they are loving on each other, and I literally get to see what life is all about. They taught me about the beauty of life and the beauty of death, and it's changed my perspective completely. So this first story, I was so mesmerized by the time I left this patient's house because this family truly showed me how understanding what was happening in the moment and being able to shift their mindset so quickly gave their loved one who was dying and gave themselves the ability to take something that could have felt very, very scary and turned it into this sacred moment. And because of that, I will never, ever, ever forget them. So I went to go see their loved one who was dying, my patient. At the time when I first showed up, I didn't think he looked like he was actively dying. He was in a phase we'd call transitioning, which means the step before actively dying. So I felt like he probably had a few weeks left, which still doesn't sound like a lot, but once you hear what happens, you'll see what I mean. And he was up, and he wasn't up, but he was awake and talking to us, and his daughter was there, his wife was there, his other children were there. It was a house full of family, and they were all, talking to me, talking to him, and carrying on with their day. Suddenly, he seemed to get lethargic and kind of fall asleep. And as I was there doing my visit and charting and making phone calls and just kind of organizing things, I noticed he had a real change in condition. He was suddenly unconscious. Suddenly had changes in breathing. And I gave it a few minutes to be like, man, because sometimes people can do that, but then they perk back up. But he was not. And I could tell, wow, I think he had a very big shift in his condition, and he may be dying soon. Of course, I'm seeing this and I need to relay this to the family, which could definitely feel, if you weren't ready for things or if you weren't expecting it, it could feel like an emergency. And I would not blame them if they would have acted as such. However, when I brought them all in to show them what I was seeing, this is where it gets me and I want to cry because it was so beautiful how they could all just shift. I showed them, look how he's breathing. He seems to be unconscious. I think there's been a change. I want you guys all to come in here and be with him. He might die soon. Although they were all sad, I wouldn't say they were shocked. I feel like they were prepared, but they didn't know it was going to happen so soon. But the way they were all able to just understand and just shift into that moment and realize that they needed to be there for their loved one who was dying. The wife went over to him, held his hand. The daughter was laying on him. The sons and grandkids and stuff. There was a house full of family. We're all in the room, and I let them be for a little bit because I knew it was a special time. So I left the room. I told them that he was okay. He looked comfortable. Just be with him. And I went in the other room and was just sort of giving them their space. And I could hear them talking to him and saying things like, "Thank you." Makes me want to cry just thinking about it. "Thank you for loving me so well. Thank you for being such a great dad. Thank you for loving us. Thank you." Like just saying thank you, and how much they love them. Just shared this most beautiful moment with their dying loved one. And I was there until he died. He ended up dying that day. I stayed until he died. He went from being pretty awake to dying very quickly, and they just sat there with him and said loving sweet nothings with him. And it was one of the most beautiful things I could have witnessed. And I feel like that's what I call love in action. The fact that I get to witness that they allowed me to be in their home and witness such a sacred moment that for many people wouldn't have been, because they would have not wanted it, right? They wouldn't have, this is not how it should happen. He didn't look like this before. And I wouldn't blame people who were doing that, but I understand it. But the way that they were able all to just shift and be in this loving space and give this man this beautiful, peaceful, sacred death was one of the most beautiful things I had ever ever witnessed. And to this day, it still sits in my head and my heart, and I think about it all the time. And I hope someday if I'm ever in that situation that I can do the same. And I feel like a lot of times it leads with the matriarch of the group or one person in the group. All it takes is one person to kind of be calm and shift the whole mood. And that's what happened there. And it was just so beautiful. The second story is one of my most memorable patients because I was so close to the family and the patient despite having a language barrier the whole time. This patient always has stood out to me and their family because he was young. He was young, he had young children. Most people, when they're young and dying, struggle a lot more because of the existential crisis they're in of not wanting to die so young, which I totally understand. Watching and being the nurse for this patient and his family really changed my life to see how much of acceptance he was in his own death and how his wife, alongside of him, together they were creating this death journey, I think, to make it so less scary for his children and for the rest of his family. It was truly something to watch because that doesn't happen that often. I would go there, I would visit quite often because he had a type of disease that had a lot of symptoms. So I was there often trying to manage these symptoms. And I would have to use an interpreter every time I went because there was a language barrier there. And I was going twice a week, 3 times a week for months. So I really got to know this patient and his wife. And I'd always use the interpreter. And sometimes we would even forget that there was like an interpreter on the phone because even though I couldn't understand what she was saying, it's like I knew what she was saying and she knew what I was saying. I came so close with his wife and I truly felt like we were really connected, even though neither one of us really knew what each other was saying, except when the interpreter would help. On the last day of this man's life, I happened to be there. I was making a visit and I could tell that he was in the actively dying phase. In this moment, the wife was in his room and she was holding his hand, head on his chest. His children were in the bed with him. They did not have the children shy away. They allowed the children to watch everything and see everything, which I think is a beautiful idea. Made it less scary for them. His parents, her parents were at his feet and then at his head. Basically, he was cocooned in like this love. Of course, everyone's crying and sad, but it was also beautiful because they were there comforting him and allowing him to let go. And they weren't keeping the kids out of the room because they shouldn't see it. They were just allowing everyone to be there and everyone to say everything they needed to say and just be with him until his last breath. And they allowed me to be there too. I was there when he took his last breath. And although it was sad, again, I keep saying this word beautiful. I almost want to say magical, which sounds weird to say, but it did. It feels magical. Like when I watch babies being born, I get this magical feeling of like, whoa, now there's this baby here alive. That is actually how it feels sometimes when I watch someone take their last breath. Although it's sad, because I'm not the immediate family, it's like the grief is a little bit removed, so I can see the beauty of it. It has changed the way I look at life. Change the way I look at life and death. And I want everyone, if they can, to have an experience like that. And I think those things can better happen if we start talking about this more. We start learning about death and dying. We start getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I hope these 2 stories can help you see that death doesn't have to be scary. It can feel sacred.